What's up, y'all? Today we'll be doing another video of reaction, commentary. Today we're gonna be doing what you don't know about hit Nickelodeon Hidden Monsters. Today I wanna do this for you guys for so long, but I keep putting it off. But we are gonna do it because I wanna do this, and I wanna do one about Disney. And if you guys want, let me know all you think. Put in the comments down below. I want to know what you guys if you guys found anything, if it's a video that you found or articles, please put in the comments down below and I will get to it. If there's another video you want me to see, like for Disney, for Cartoon Network, if there's anything else, like if there's any other videos you want me to react to, any type, music, movies, any shows, or like any videos on YouTube, or in the comments down below, and I will get to it for sure. So if you guys want to see more of this, don't forget to hit the like and subscribe.
If you were born after 1980, chances are your childhood involved getting home from school and flicking on Nickelodeon.
Yes.
Nickelodeon produced some of the biggest child stars and kids shows of the last 4.5 decades. Considering millions of kids watch Nickelodeon and 90% of their stars are children, you'd expect Nickelodeon to be a safe place for kids. But unfortunately, the exact opposite is true. While Nickelodeon and their most powerful producer Dan Schneider have been discussed here on YouTube for years, these stories are now being explored in the mainstream media via a new documentary, Quiet on Set. Quiet on Set focuses on Schneider's shows and 3 monsters that worked on his sets. But these Nickelodeon monsters, Brian Peck, Jason Handy, and Azeel Channel, are just the tip of the iceberg.
Oof.
There is so much more to this story and many more dangerous people involved. So today we're going to be discussing the history of Dan Schneider at Nickelodeon.
But let me give one set. I'm gonna do one set real quick.
The individuals who both brought Schneider in and not only continued to employ him, but those that handed him more power, influence, money, young stars, women to exploit, and more people to hurt. We'll of course cover the 3 aforementioned Nickelodeon monsters working on Schneider's sets, but we'll also explore the monsters that haven't been discussed yet. Then later we'll go over how these Nickelodeon criminals connect to a much larger problem that has seeped into the very architecture of Hollywood and spent the last several decades spreading throughout some of the most recognizable TV shows, movies, and famous faces around the world. Because these vultures are very well connected, with one even being dubbed the Forrest Gump of Hollywood. As you'll see later in the video, these predators use their powerful friends to get hired on productions despite their record, to silence publications trying to expose them, to blackmail their young victims, and much, much more. So sit back, relax, grab a drink, and let's dive in to the long-awaited downfall of Dan Schneider and the Nickelodeon machine.
Nickelodeon machine. Chapter 1.
Nickelodeon was founded by Vivian Horner on December 1st, 1977, but it didn't launch until 16 months later on April 1st, 1979. Statistics released in September 2018 revealed that Nickelodeon is available to about 87 million households in the US alone, but the channel exists in many other countries around the world. When Nickelodeon launched, it marketed itself as the first cable channel for children, and it was initially completely commercial free and remained without advertising for 5 years. In the fall of 1985, Nickelodeon went through an image change and a programming shift. These changes ultimately resulted in Nickelodeon, along with its sister networks MTV and VH1, all being sold to Viacom in the same year. In the beginning, Nickelodeon mainly focused on educational programming and later added a variety of cartoons, game shows, and kid shows in the mid-80s through to the early 90s. In the early 90s, they started developing their own original programming with shows like Rugrats, Doug, The Adventures of Pete and Pete, and Clarissa Explains It All. By the mid-90s, Nickelodeon was doing well and developing even more successful shows like Rocko's Modern Life, The Secret World of Alex Mack, and All That. All That ran
You could
from
laugh at Alice
1994 to 2005 and was extremely successful for Nickelodeon, garnering acclaim for its impact on kids' television and its diverse cast. The head writer of All That, who also served as an executive producer from season 4 onwards, took several of the cast members from All That and developed spin-offs, giving the cast members their own shows. There were a total of 7 shows that originated from All That. The first spin-off came out in October 1995 and was called Action League Now. The following year, in 1996, there was both Kenan and Kel and Kablam that debuted. And in 1999,
I remember that.
one
It
of
was
All
so
That's biggest stars,
weird.
Amanda Bynes, was given her own show titled The Amanda Show. A few seasons later, Amanda's co-stars on The Amanda Show, Drake Bell and Josh Peck, were given their own show, Drake and Josh. A co-star from Drake and Josh, Miranda Cosgrove, was then given her own show, iCarly. And iCarly is arguably the height of Nickelodeon's success. The head writer from All That, the controversial Dan Schneider, created all 3 of these shows and went on to create many other shows for Nickelodeon: Victorious, Sam and Cat, Henry Danger, Game Changers, Ned's Declassified, and more. Schneider and his production company,
I didn't know he was
Schneider's
part of
Bakery,
that,
seemed to be untouchable. He was
know he was
Nickelodeon's
part of
golden
Ned's
boy,
Declassified.
creating hit after hit for the network that kids were obsessed with. The media dubbed Schneider the king of children's television, and his shows made him an empire and extremely rich. Nickelodeon were so delighted with Schneider that he was given the first ever and the only ever Lifetime Achievement Award at the Kids' Choice Awards in 2014. To accept the award, Schneider was introduced by a group made up of cast members from his most successful shows that still had ties at Nickelodeon. The cast members thanked Schneider for their careers and success, and Schneider walked on stage to thunderous applause. Kids all around the world celebrated the man who created so many of their favorite shows, stars, and some of their favorite childhood memories, from coming home from school and turning on your favorite Nickelodeon show. But while this moment of Dan Schneider accepting the award was the peak and pinnacle of his career, a few seconds later, as everyone is applauding Schneider, the camera pans across the stage on all of the cast members, and in that moment, Schneider's downfall began.
Why?
This was the moment where a few people noticed something quite odd. 2 of Dan's biggest stars with deep Nickelodeon ties were missing.
Oh yeah, Miranda
Jeanette
Cosgrove?
McCurdy and Miranda Cosgrove were not on stage. Both Jeanette and Miranda were not only 2 of the stars of his most successful show, iCarly, but they both were on multiple Schneider shows, and Jeanette was currently the lead of his show, Sam and Cat. A few people chalked this up to a scheduling or some other small, insignificant issue, but a few people thought there could be something bigger here and began looking back at Schneider's career and Nickelodeon as a whole.
What
they found and began talking about online was extremely strange.
What was that show called with Amanda Bynes? There was a show called there was a show called I don't remember, but it was like a sitcom. It wasn't like a kids show.
Disturbing and unsettling content across Schneider's 20 years at Nickelodeon. People kept digging and made some truly disturbing revelations. Allegations of creepy behavior, horrendous work environments, bullying child actors, rampant sexism, manipulation, abuse, unsettling accusations of sexual young children, rage-filled explosions, and multiple predators behind the scenes that were preying on young child actors. But Schneider and the convicted predators of Nickelodeon are only just the beginning.
Golden boy.
Dan Schneider was born on January 14th, 1966 in Memphis, Tennessee. He has 3 sisters and he grew up interested in theater and did theater at his high school. He did get into and attend Harvard University for 1 semester, according to him, although I haven't seen any concrete evidence that proves that he did go there. He did drop out after 1 semester and decided to take a chance on his dream. He then moved from the East Coast to the West Coast and tried his hand at becoming a star in Los Angeles, California. Schneider had a few roles in mainly teen comedies such as Better Off Dead, Hot Resort, Happy Together, Listen to Me. But in 1986, he was cast in an ABC TV sitcom, Head of the Class, playing a character named Dennis Blunden. Head of the Class is the reason that Schneider got a connection at Nickelodeon. He was on the show for all 5 seasons that it ran. It ended in 1991. But in 1988, Schneider and one of his co-stars were asked to host the first ever Kids' Choice Awards for Nickelodeon. Wow. You may know that name as Robbins is currently head of Paramount Pictures and the former president of Nickelodeon. When Schneider and Robbins agreed to host the Kids' Choice Awards, they hadn't even heard of Nickelodeon, but decided to say yes anyway. After meeting Hesh at the award shows, they then developed a friendship and continued to stay in contact after the award show. It wasn't long before Hesh offered Schneider and Robbins a development deal at Nickelodeon, but due to the fact that they were under contract still with ABC and Head of the Class, they turned Nickelodeon down and just went back to work at Head of the Class. When Head of the Class ended in 1991, Robbins partnered up with one of his friends, Mike Tollin, and they ended up making a production company together that was just named after both of them. By this stage, Hesh was head of development at Nickelodeon, and he went to Robbins and Tollin and asked them if they wanted to do anything with Nickelodeon, and the first thing that he offered them was to do a taping of a show. The show that they produced was a half-an-hour production that was supposed to be them touring comedy shows around the US, and this was supposed to take place over 2 weeks, and they're supposed to go to all these cities, but in reality they filmed this over 2 days and just manipulated a lot of the footage. Despite the fabrication, Hesh was pleased and he asked them if they had any ideas to pitch to Nickelodeon. Robbins pitched Hesh the idea of SNL but for kids. Nickelodeon loved the idea and put the pilot for All That into development. They then decided the perfect person to fill the head writer spot on All That was their friend from Head of the Class, Dan Schneider. Even before All That was on the air, they were changing how things were done with kids' TV. In case you don't know, usually when a new show is being pitched and they're making a pilot, they will write the script, revise it, do the new versions, and then they will cast the show, film it. It gets looked at and they decide whether to greenlight it or not. But with All That, they decided to actually cast the show and then write it based on the strengths of the child actors. You can see this tradition continue throughout Schneider's shows, as he usually will take one of his stars from a previous show and then build the show around them. It's also why you get a lot of his characters that have the same first name as the actors that are playing those characters.
It's kind of like Adam Sandler in his movies. Like a lot of the cast of his are literally his own team, his own friends. And they make movies out of everything.
For months, they looked all around the country to cast the show, and they ended up picking Angelique Bates, Lori Beth Denberg, Katarina Johnson, Kel Mitchell, Elisa Reyes, Josh Sherver, and Kenan Thompson. They ended up shooting the pilot at Nickelodeon Studios in Universal Studios.
I would like to see the pilot
Florida,
of this episode.
The pilot was actually shelved after they shot it because it got such poor ratings from the testing audience that watched it. Despite the fact the testing was poor and focus groups didn't connect with the show, the then president of Nickelodeon, Geraldine Laybourne, stepped in and decided to pick the show up regardless. The show performed very well, and after the second season, they were still filming at Nickelodeon Studios in Universal Orlando, Florida. They then decided that they were going to move to the West Coast. The third season, they went in at Paramount Pictures. This was while Nickelodeon on Sunset, the new studio, was being built. And they went into that studio, and then all that, the remaining seasons, and all the other Schneider shows ended up being shot at Nickelodeon on Sunset. Prior to moving to Nickelodeon on Sunset, Angelica Bates left the show and a new cast member joined. This cast member was very young in comparison, but was discovered at the Laugh Factory Comedy Club, where she was doing stand-up despite her very young age. Schneider and other Nickelodeon producers happened to see her at the comedy club and knew immediately that the girl was very talented and had the potential to become a star. So in 1996, Amanda Bynes joined the cast of All That. For the next decade, Amanda Bynes would work with Schneider on many TV shows, but also other projects like the 2002 movie Big Fat Liar. Amanda was on All That from 1996 to 1999, and in 1999 she was given her own show, The Amanda Show. The Amanda Show was the very first...
I believe Amanda Bynes was the ultimate target. I mean, it was taking advantage of the whole time. Because her dad was the one who forced her to do this. To keep going.
Time that Dan Schneider was listed as a creator, and this was the very first time that he truly got the power that came with being a showrunner. A key thing to mention here is when the Amanda Show started, they were still at Paramount Pictures, which, if you've never been on one of these lots, there are hundreds of productions going on and thousands and thousands and thousands of people around and seeing what's happening and observing each other. There's so many productions that are happening. I mean, even just my last video, Glee, they filmed at Paramount Pictures. My other channel where I used to talk about the L Word Generation Q, they filmed the first season at Paramount Pictures. So you can't really get away with as much because there's so many other people around. Whereas when they moved to Nickelodeon on Sunset, Dan Schneider was in charge of everyone that was in there.
That's right.
So only when the Nickelodeon executives came, and I can't imagine people that are being bullied and manipulated by Dan Schneider are then going to go to Nickelodeon executives that are only coming in to, you know, watch the episode through or something. Dan Schneider had all this power and control because he was the person in charge, basically, of Nickelodeon on Sunset and had no one to answer to or even to see what he was doing. And of course, they moved into Nickelodeon on Sunset in around about 2000. So for 15 years, his behavior just escalated because he had no one watching him or even observing what he was doing. Just to add, this is kind of obvious, but I'm just going to say it anyway. Given what we've learned in this video so far about how interconnected and interwoven Dan Schneider and all these Nickelodeon executives and development heads were all friends together too, as well as working together. It's not just that he was this like amazing producer, show creator, knew what kids wanted to watch. It's also the fact that all these people are friends and do each other favors, and all of the people that brought him in and kept him there despite knowing what he was doing, how he was treating people, because hello, the internet was talking about it. Of course, people on set knew about it. They also all played a part in what happened to all of these people. He was just getting more power, more money, more control, more people under him, and just continued to rule this studio and do whatever he wanted that was facilitated by Nickelodeon, and them just basically being like, that's the golden boy, keep giving him money and letting him do whatever he wants because it means we get even more money. In the recently released documentary Quiet on Set, the only two female writers from the first season of The Amanda Show spoke about both the culture on the set of Dan Schneider's show and how Dan Schneider treated them personally. The two women, Jenny Killian and Christy Stratton, were hired as new writers on The Amanda Show. They were the only two women, and Schneider hired them, but told them that they would have to split one salary between the two of them.
Damn.
Jenny and Christy spoke about a toxic set and explained how Schneider put extremely inappropriate names, terms, and jokes in the children's show that they all were writing. He also told the writers not to let Nickelodeon executives know what they were doing. And
they didn't know?
Schneider, according to
he didn't report to the culprit. Nobody. That's, oh my god, that's a red flag. That's a big one.
To multiple sources, watched pornography on his computer at work, ran an extremely sexist environment, frequently singled out women and humiliated them, asked them bizarre sex-related questions, and asked them to do extremely inappropriate things like delivering a pitch for a sketch while pretending they are being sodomized. Schneider fired Christy, one of the two female writers, after she had friends over one evening and later went to a concert, because Schneider told his staff he owned all of their time throughout the season, including evenings and the weekends. Jenny was the only female writer that remained for season 2 of The Amanda Show and was only offered to return if she worked the entire 27 weeks of the season, but that she would only be paid for 16 of these weeks, essentially working 11 weeks for free. After asking the only female writer to work half of the season for free, Schneider then brought on a brand new male writer for the season, and despite the fact that this male writer had no credits and was completely new with no experience, he was given a full salary for the entire 27 weeks. Jenny only spent 4 days on the second season production of The Amanda Show after Schneider isolated and humiliated her. Jenny ended up suing for discrimination, with Christy writing a letter of support for the case backing up Jenny's claims. Jenny's lawsuit with Nickelodeon and Schneider was settled for an undisclosed amount. Another woman who worked for Schneider once before is Liz Feldman. She worked for Schneider when she was 18, and now she has an extremely successful career as a writer, one of her most recent projects being Dead to Me, the Netflix original.
I never heard of that.
Liz has actually spoken out and tweeted many times about the inappropriate behavior of Dan Schneider whenever she worked for him. Again, she was only 18 years old, and Liz has spoken about him being incredibly inappropriate with her and making some really, really horrendous remarks. You're going to see me jumping in a lot during this video because there's just so much information. I feel like I could do a 10-part series. But just to add a little bit additional context to what Liz Feldman has been saying, she actually went on Sophia Bush's podcast and she talked about what happened when she worked on All That and worked with Schneider, and she said that he sexually harassed her and that she got fired for not taking her bra off because that's what he asked her to do in the middle of the writer's room, which, judging by what he's asked other women to do in the writer's room, that doesn't surprise me at all. Also, saying that, just the bra thing flagged something else in my mind that I should have mentioned earlier when I was talking about Brian Robbins and Schneider. Brian Robbins is, again, the current head of Paramount. Schneider and Brian Robbins did an interview with 17 magazine when they were still on Head of the Class, and they were asked a bunch of questions, obviously knowing it's 17 magazine, it's for teenage girls primarily. And the question was, what would Dan and Brian like girls to know about dating guys? And the quote they gave was, "Wear bras that hook in the front. We love a challenge." And apparently a lot of parents wrote into the magazine complaining about this. I also was mentioning this to some of my friends and people that are slightly younger than I, because I'm a millennial. My kind of cutoff with Schneider was The Amanda Show, and I remember a little bit of Drake and Josh because my younger sisters watched it, but I'm unfortunately too old for like iCarly and all that stuff. But a lot of people told me that there was a lot of hooking bras in the front in iCarly and certain other shows. Like apparently it was a bit of like an ongoing thing. So I guess that all ties it in together. There's going to be a lot of things like this in this video that it all connects, and all of these people connect to one another. All of Schneider's earlier behaviors continued and were magnified throughout his tenure. And things got even worse on his sets as he gained more and more success and more power. Schneider was becoming almost untouchable at Nickelodeon due to the millions and millions brought in by his ever-growing roster of shows. A few common consistent stories exist on nearly all of Schneider's sets. The first of these were the constant massages Schneider would ask employees for. Another consistency seen throughout all of his shows were the bizarre things he would have young child actors do. Weird clips that come across very creepy, and lots of things with child actors' feet. Schneider's behavior has been highlighted lately due to the documentary Quiet on Set, but the creepy clips, the massages, the terrible behavior, and the many other claims I've been discussing have been spoken about online over many recent years. Many of his former stars like Jeanette McCurdy and Alexa Nikolas have spoken out about Schneider. Jeanette McCurdy wrote a brilliant autobiography called I'm Glad My Mom Died, and Jeanette spoke throughout the book about the abhorrent behavior of the creator. While McCurdy did not reveal who the creator was in her book, it seems strikingly obvious that it was Schneider, given the fact that the majority of McCurdy's career was spent working on 2 shows that Schneider created. Also, an error in the first printing of McCurdy's book did have one mention of Dan instead of the creator. In later editions of the book, the name Dan was removed and replaced with the creator. Alexa Nikolas has spoken out about Dan Schneider on her new YouTube channel, where she frequently discusses her time on Schneider's set and at Nickelodeon. Alexa has also protested Nickelodeon many times in the recent years. With the spotlight on Schneider due to Quiet on Set, Schneider released a video commenting on all of the allegations. Unfortunately for Schneider, he's not dealing with kids anymore.
What the heck?
His video was very poorly scripted, and he pretended it was an interview with one of the men that appeared on his shows, Boogie. The entire thing proved even further how Schneider has not changed, grown, or learned anything. Instead of getting a professional journalist or even someone who would give him the smallest amount of pushback, Schneider asked someone who was his former subordinate. Schneider's interview and quote-unquote apology was absolutely shredded online and met with even more backlash. While Schneider had the most power at Nickelodeon, and his behavior was reflected across his many shows that reached millions and millions of children over almost 20 years that they were on television, there also was a hive of dangerous individuals using Schneider's sets to build connections with child actors and then exploit, manipulate, and prey on these young actors. While the discussion around Schneider's shows and the dangerous people involved with the shows have been spoken about in the mainstream media lately, there's much more to this story. Because it wasn't just 1, 2, or 3 bad apples, there were many more people preying on children throughout Dan Schneider's sets and throughout the world of Nickelodeon.
That's a lot. That's a bit. Chapter 3.
Brian Peck has worked in the film and television industry since the 1980s.
That was Pickle Boy. I know he is a dirty boy.
He's primarily worked on horror movies, children's television, and family shows. Peck has worked with some of the biggest child stars in the last 30 years and on some of the most influential children's shows on television. He also has a network of extremely connected.
Well, I don't know it. I know he went to prison for this. this situation, but I don't know if he's still in prison or he already got out. But that's all I know.
Connected, famous, and powerful friends. Peck has worked in a variety of roles. He started on Growing Pains, working as Alan Thicke's stand-in. He's had some small roles on the show. He was also a dialogue coach and worked with Leonardo DiCaprio. He then went on to Nickelodeon, where he worked on a plethora of Dan Schneider shows. He worked on All That as the dialogue coach, The Amanda Show as the dialogue coach, and he also appeared in The Amanda Show the vast majority of the time interacting with a celebrity as he was playing someone named Pickle Boy. And a lot of the time he is depicting, implying, and insinuating sexual acts, again, on a kids show. After working on Growing Pains, Boy Meets World, and the Nickelodeon shows All That, Kenan and Kel, Good Burger, and The Amanda Show.
Oh, that was him?
Peck then moved on to another Dan Schneider show, this time the WB show, What I Like About You, that starred Amanda Bynes.
That's what it was
Jenny
called.
Schneider.
What I Like About You. I know there was a clip where she was some little. Okay, it sounds wrong, but it was like a little boy asking something from her, and she pretended that she did.
Had
Never
a
mind.
co-creator credit with Will Calhoun from Friends, and that show probably could be a video in itself because there was a lot of stuff behind the scenes, and even with Schneider
Will
and Calhoun there was all these issues and with the WB. But I do actually have a plan to do a video on a lot of the problematic things with the WB and their shows, so I'll leave that for another day. But Brian Peck worked again with Schneider after all those other times. He worked on
X-Men.
What I Like About You, then he worked on Disney's Holes, and then he went and worked on the first X-Men with his friend Bryan Singer, and he also worked on X2 with Bryan Singer. And they are such close friends that Brian Peck was basically the person that was in the scene with Stan Lee when he had his cameo in X-Men. And also, Brian Peck was who Bryan Singer asked to do the DVD commentary with him.
Hi, my name is Bryan Singer, and I'm the director of X-Men.
I'm the other Brian Peck. I'm not the director of X-Men.
I've asked Brian if he would help me out here because I'm a little uncomfortable doing these things by myself.
And I really want to highlight here how important DVDs and DVD commentaries were in the early 2000s, because there just wasn't any other way to get a lot of information about behind the scenes. I mean, there's always been like celebrity blinds and other stuff like that, message boards and things, but for the most part, you couldn't just go on YouTube or the internet like you can today and get 50 people discussing all the Easter eggs in the latest Captain Marvel movie. And if you wanted to know why they filmed something a certain way or why Stan Lee was in the movie, a lot of the time it was DVD commentaries that were explaining things. And that was the only way you were really going to learn a lot about the behind the scenes production and also actors and things, because interviews weren't as accessible then too. I always say in my videos, the internet wasn't what it is today, and someone will always say, oh, well, the internet did exist. But yes, I know it existed, but I'm just saying that it didn't exist the way it is today. There wasn't the access there was.
You're going to see something very exciting here. One is Stan Lee selling hot dogs. My buddy Gary Goddard was the guy walking alongside in the flannel shirt. And the guy eating hot dogs is you.
The fat guy in the Hawaiian shirt eating hot dogs. Hey, that's me. Thank you for... I'm on screen so long. Thank you.
You are. It's in fact, you're so imposing in the screen, people don't even see Stan Lee.
All of that to say, the fact that Bryan Singer is taking this guy and putting him on the DVD commentary, they were close friends, and put a extremely large pin in that point, because in the next chapter we're going to get into that, believe me. So after Peck then had worked on X-Men, everything like that, 2003. If you go to his IMDb, you will see pretty much from when he's been working in the 80s, certainly from the early 90s, multiple productions every year. There is not a year in the 90s that he does not have a production. And then in 2003, you see this gap where there's a gap of a little over a year. Some might say 16 months. But the reason that he has this 16-month gap is because he was serving a prison sentence for an unforgivable and heinous, horrendous crime. And now we're going to discuss this crime. But again, I just want to remind you, put a big pin in Brian Peck's connections, because he is just one branch on a truly, truly disturbing tree that we will go much more into in the next chapter. In the previous chapter, we discussed Schneider's shows and the fact that iCarly is arguably the most successful one. But a close second would be the show Drake and Josh, starring Drake Bell and Josh Peck, who were both previously on The Amanda Show before getting their own spin-off. Drake Bell was born on June 27th, 1986 in Long Beach, California.
Wow.
Prior to his time on Nickelodeon, Bell was a fairly successful child actor,
he's so little.
appearing on shows like Home Improvement and in box office successes
That was
like
him?
Jerry Maguire. Throughout his career, his father had served as his manager and always accompanied Drake on set. When Drake began working at Nickelodeon, his father, Joe Bell, began to become uncomfortable with a member of production staff and their behavior towards his young son. This member of production began to simultaneously push Drake away from his father and also integrate himself into Drake's life in every aspect. And all of these things increased Joe Bell's suspicion of this production staff member, Brian Peck. Joe was so uncomfortable with Brian's behavior towards his son and expressed his feelings about Peck. Joe was dismissed and told that Brian was gay and just a touchy-feely person. Brian soon manipulated a young Drake into thinking his father was mismanaging his career, and Peck was also going out of his way to spend more and more time.
Where was all these parents at? I mean, I know they were all there, but they forced the parents. I know from the documentary, I know they forced the parents, or like trying to convince them to like go in a different room and wait for the kids to be done. And that's all I know. But parents, that's the thing. It's that they have so much power, these executives, over these kids and everybody, that it's control. It's just insane how these dirty people just have so much power and they can do whatever they want.
With Drake. Peck had Drake over to his house for coaching. He offered to pick him up and drive him to auditions. He took him to Disney. He went to all of Drake's concerts, sometimes even driving hours and hours away. And he even had Drake Bell sleep over at his house because it was easier, apparently. Drake was 13 and 14 when all of these things were happening, and after he was manipulated by Peck, he had his mother tell his father that he didn't want his father to be his manager anymore. Joe just wanted to support his son no matter what, so he handed everything over to Drake's mother and removed himself as Drake's manager. When handing over all of the documentation, bank account details, and other miscellaneous paperwork, Joe Bell made one qualification regarding his removal as Drake's manager. His only stipulation was that his son was never, ever to be left alone with Brian Peck.
Damn.
So Peck had wormed his way into Drake Bell's life in every conceivable way. He was obviously seeing him a lot at work, but he would find any way to spend even more and more time with Drake Bell, who was obviously a child. He's 13 to 14 years old, and Peck would do everything he could to manipulate him. He would manipulate Bell's mother, and because Drake Bell lived in Orange County and was a lot of the time either going on auditions in LA or going to work in LA or playing a concert around there. Drake ended up staying at Peck's house because, according to Drake Bell, his mom didn't like driving, and Brian Peck was constantly offering to take him to auditions and things because he did coach Bell at his home, again, as he was a dialogue coach. This was kind of like Peck's little in. That was how he tried to get these kids alone in his house. That was his excuse, or probably why he went into the industry in the first place. I really recommend watching the documentary Quiet on Set, The Dark Side of Kids TV. It's on ID Network and HBO Max, and I have it listed below.
But the thing is that with that documentary, they don't show a lot of stuff. It's like nitpick every little thing. I don't like that. They say they talk about some stuff about like feet and touching and whatnot, but there's so much darkness in Nickelodeon that they just don't want to talk about in the light. I mean, the Dan Schneider has so much. Just think about it like this. You have a huge company, and every single one of those people are pretty much PDF. I'm not gonna say the actual word, but almost everybody was one. Everybody was a dirty person. Everybody's nasty on Nickelodeon, and the thing is that everybody who was higher than Dan was just as dirty as everybody else. And yet, the parents would try to convince the kids to not listen, and trying to call the police on them.
Sources, my sourcing list is very, very long for this video, especially because, again, the next chapter has so much going on that there definitely needed to be a lot of sourcing. But I recommend watching it because Drake Bell tells his whole story across episodes 3 and 4 of the show. And I will insert some short clips here, but obviously due to copyright, I can't put the whole thing in. So in the documentary, Drake describes waking up one morning and he was being assaulted by Peck. He didn't go into a huge amount of detail because he simply said, just imagine the worst thing that someone can do to you, and that's what he did to me. This then continued for months and months, with Bell hiding the entire thing and Peck continuing to attack Bell any chance he got at his house.
And that's the way it happened for quite a while. He had pretty much worked his way into every aspect of my life.
There were a couple of people apart from Drake Bell's dad who obviously knew that there was something super creepy about Peck. There was a story that Drake Bell told about his girlfriend's mother, who pretty immediately knew what was going on because Drake described a day that he was at his girlfriend's house and he was purposely trying to hide from Peck. And this was, again, like flip phone time. So Peck was calling Drake. He was just not answering. He's calling. And then he ends up calling Drake Bell's girlfriend's house, trying to get Drake because they were supposed to go to Disney together. And Drake obviously didn't want to go. And after all of this initiation of contact from Peck, Drake then was pulled aside by his girlfriend's mom, and she was asking what is going on here, because this seems incredibly strange that this grown 40-something-year-old man is trying to call a 13, 14-year-old child and hang out with them, and is calling again and again. And I mean, I think just even that alone is weird, never mind the incessant calling. and she clearly knew something odd was going on.
Very
And
good. At
Drake
least
just
somebody
said,
knew.
oh, tried to just blow it off basically, and didn't go into any details. Then Drake talked about one day he doesn't know what happened, what brought this on, but he was on the phone to his mom and he started screaming down the phone everything that had happened to him, everything that Peck had done to him, and all the ways Peck had hurt him. Belle's mom then phoned the police. The police came down, spoke to Drake.
The investigation was pretty brutal. I had to be excruciatingly detailed about every single thing, time that it had happened with two absolute strangers.
And they ended up having to set up a phone call with Drake and Peck where Drake would try and get Peck to confess what he had done. The police obviously recording everything.
The worst part was I had to make a phone call to Brian and get him to admit what he'd done.
Peck then asked Drake on the phone call several times if they were being recorded, but despite this, he ended up confessing to everything and all of the things that he had done to Drake.
He just started a full-on confession. It was just all these mixed emotions of thank God, finally, this gets handled and finally something happens to this person.
Peck was, of course, arrested and immediately admitted guilt, given the fact that they had a recorded phone call of him admitting to all of the crimes. But things get even worse from here. You think, oh, he's arrested, maybe there's some justice.
He got released, I think.
Good behavior. I mean, you already know he only served 16 months, so what kind of justice is that? After Peck was arrested, they went back to work at Nickelodeon on Sunset, and Dan Schneider one day asked all of the parents to leave the room, and he just spoke to the kids and explained to them that Brian Peck wouldn't be back. He explained why he had been arrested, and the rest of the child actors were all kind of looking around thinking, I wonder if it was one of us that this happened to. But nobody knew who it was. Dan Schneider ended up calling Drake and asking him about it, and because Drake and Schneider had a good relationship, Drake told him, yes, it was me that he attacked. And Schneider then told him, that's all I needed to hear. You don't need to say anything else. Do you need anything? Drake said no, and they moved on. Drake actually did talk about this in the show as well, but Brian Peck actually was trying to get cast as the dad on the show of Drake and Josh, which, can you imagine? But thankfully, Drake always was like, there's no way I'm letting him anywhere near this show, despite Brian Peck trying to worm his way in even more. But there is someone who did end up working on that show that I'm sure caused Drake a lot of pain that we'll talk about in a second.
Wait,
so in order to go to court, some time goes by, and Drake, his brother...
I know it was Brian Peck and the other white guy, the young guy. That's how I know from the documentary. That's all.
And his mom are going to the sentencing hearing. Brian Peck has pleaded no contest, so he is going to be sentenced most likely to jail time. They all go to the courthouse, and to Drake's absolute shock, the entire side of Brian Peck's side of the courtroom is absolutely packed with his famous and powerful friends, people that Drake Bell has worked with before and after. And 41 of these people wrote letters not only praising Brian Peck, but discussing how he must have been put in a really uncomfortable situation. And many of the letters blame the child victim for what happened and say Brian must have been really tempted, and this is so out of character for him. And all of these people wrote letters just saying what a wonderful person Brian Peck was.
Yeah. But
they wrote these letters knowing like knowing that not only he did this, but he confessed and was guilty and had recorded evidence of him confessing and told these people to their face, I did this, but still write me a letter saying how great I am and how this child must have been the reason that I attacked them. These people include huge celebrities like James Marsden, who's been in everything from X-Men to Superman Returns to Bryan Singer Productions. Put a pin in that. And also movies like 27 Dresses, Sonic, Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, The Notebook. James Marsden, who was in X-Men 2 and is in tons of Bryan Singer projects, they're friends. Brian Peck was James Marsden's best man at his wedding. That is how close they are. And I found this out in one of the other letters. And also, this last part is rumors. The best man thing is I mean, pretty solid that it's true, because it's mentioned in this letter that was written, 21 years ago. But additionally, I've also heard, and I have heard Alexa Nicholas mentioned this as well, that apparently Brian Peck is the godparent to James Marsden's kids. So I can't confirm that, but he was the best man at his wedding. So considering all of that, I'm really not surprised that James Marsden hasn't made one single peep about any of this. Other letter writers include the cast of Boy Meets World, Ryder Strong, who was 24 at the time he wrote his letter. He wasn't a child. And Will Friedle, who was 27 when he wrote the letter. And Will actually went on to later work with Drake Bell on Ultimate Spider-Man. And of course, it didn't say a word then because he thought the letters are sealed.
Ultimate Spider-Man, I know he's, Drake Bell played Spider-Man. Who did Will Friedle play? Comment down below and tell me that, please.
Forever, no one is ever going to know. So he didn't say anything. But now that he knew the information was going to come out, because they don't care about the fact they wrote the letters, they care about the fact that people are finding out about the letters. Just want to add a few additional things about the Boy Meets World response. Basically, they have a podcast called Pod Meets World where they go over episodes of Boy Meets World, and it's Ryder Strong, Will Friedle, and Daniel Fishel, so Sean, Eric, and Topanga. And Danielle didn't seem to have any relationship with Brian Peck outside of they worked on the show together. And Will actually brought him to 3 other shows after that and admits they were friends and close. Ryder admits they were friends and close and socialized a lot.
I was working a lot after Boy Meets World. This guy had so ingratiated himself in my life. I took him to 3 shows after Boy Meets World. The person he presented was this great, funny guy who was really good at his job. And you wanted to hang out with. Again, I didn't hang out with him a lot socially, but we were on 4 different shows together on sets all the time.
I did. I mean, we hung out all the time, yeah.
You hung out socially, right? Yeah, so that's the thing. But that's because I just didn't have much social life.
They basically put together this episode, in my opinion, because they have gone to a PR agency and said, what are we going to do because these letters are coming out? They released this response a full month before the documentary came out. I think that they were trying to prep their most loyal fans, who are the people that are listening to this podcast, and kind of give their justifications for writing these letters. So in the episode, they bring on a therapist, which is Katie Morton, who is the YouTube therapist that appeared with Shane Dawson when he wanted to be able to diagnose someone in a YouTube video and call them a sociopath. So maybe she's a topic for another day, but honestly, she's the least of our problems in this episode. Danielle gives like a little voiceover summary at the start, basically saying, we have guest star coming up in a few episodes that is going to be a big discussion point, and that's why we want to put this episode out, which is incredibly disingenuous because you're putting this out because a documentary is coming out and you're going to be absolutely destroyed for writing these letters.
And I think also I believe that I remember what was the net from Nesty Classified School Survival Guy, the podcast. I remember they were talking about this as well, and I think one point the one who played Ned Devin, I think that's his name, made fun of Drake Bell at the time, and then a couple months later to a year later, he apologized and everything. But
Do not mention Brian
was too
Peck's
late.
name.
I saw this person maybe 7 years ago.
They never mention the victim's name. They never even really talk about the victim, even though Will worked with Drake Bell after this on the Ultimate Spider-Man. They don't really go into any apology stuff. All they talk about is how they were these amazing top 2% of actors, so successful, and they go into all these details about how they were dating older women and all the just things that don't matter at all.
I think it's very hard for us too in the particular situation we were in because we were achieving success. Like what we were doing at that age was an accomplishment. We had made it as actors into the top 10% of actors in the whole world or 2% of actors in the whole world.
Then they go into their justifications for why they were friends with him and why they wrote these letters.
But when there's an actual victim involved and now I'm on the abuser's side, that's the thing I can't get over and haven't been able to get over.
Clear though, he didn't deny that he didn't say that nothing had happened. So by the time we heard about this case and knew anything about it, it was always in the context of I did this thing, I am guilty, I am going to take whatever punishment the government determines I am, but I'm a victim of jailbait, right? Like I saw that, there was this hot guy and I just did this thing and
he did all of it.
Underage. Right?
Yeah, exactly.
And we bought that storyline. We bought into that storyline as opposed
reminder, they were 24 and 27 when they wrote these letters. They knew who the victim was. They knew he was a child, and they even were in court and saw him face to face. I will just say, listening to the clips again as I'm pulling them to put this in the video, I do think Will actually does feel bad and guilty, and he is at least trying to say the right thing. I don't get that impression from Ryder whatsoever, though. And then they start getting super angry about the fact that this is going to be news and this is going to affect them and going to affect Boy Meets World. How about how it affected the victim and how your letters affected them? It's just wild to me. Like the entire...
I'm looking it up here. He played he was on the Ultimate Spider-Man. He played Deadpool.
Entire hour and a half, which is heavily sponsored, and I think everyone should be paid for their work, obviously, but maybe the hour and a half video where you put out a response to why you wrote a letter blaming a child who was a victim and sided with the predator, that's maybe not the best place to put ads. And the ads that I got were that each line would start off basically saying something that was trying to imply something sexual, and I'm like, is this really the episode to put these things on? And honestly, one of the worst bits was where Ryder just starts talking about how this is going to affect them and the podcast, and people are going to think there's all these bad things going on in Hollywood, and yeah, there is. Case in point.
And so, a million articles are going to be written. We know that's now. There's going to be variety, there's going to be clickbait articles, and we're not adding any new information to the world. Instead, we're bringing something that's already out there, but it's not in the foreground, right? And it's we're
shining a spotlight.
It's not, but the fact that this person, a convicted child offender, worked on Boy Meets World is not even one of the top 100 facts about Boy Meets World in the universe. After this, it's going to be the thing, right? It's going to be, it will rise to the top of one of the most talked about facts about us and our show. And okay, so what's wrong with that? I think I think pedophilia just lends itself to a moral panic. And that I don't love the idea that we're playing into the sort of conspiracy theories around Hollywood, which are ridiculous and so overblown, I think. I don't like the idea that we are, affecting the cultural memory of Boy Meets World with this.
To me, anyway, it just seemed like an absolutely outrageous response when it would have just been so easy to write an actual apology to Drake Bell and then write some sort of a little paragraph piece just saying how you fucked up, how sorry you are, how you're gonna do better. But instead they made money and just took no accountability.
That was one of the things he was famous for, is his storytelling and the people he knew and how he knew them, and who you should meet, and oh man, who would be great as this director, you should meet this person, this actor.
We used to call him the Forrest Gump of Hollywood.
Yeah,
because he knew everybody.
He was everybody.
Everybody had been behind the scenes of so many famous movies and conversations, and
he knew everybody.
While all of the letters that were written are unbelievable, I cannot imagine. Even I have friends of 25 years that I've been friends with since I was 9 and 10, and if this happened and they asked me to write a letter, like there's nothing on earth that would ever make me write a letter like this for someone who had done this crime. And I'm sure most people watching this would feel exactly the same way. But also the fact that these people, they knew Drake Bell, they knew the victim. These people wrote the letters, and many of them went to the sentencing and stood on the side of this predator against a child victim and said nothing. Will Friedle, who worked with Drake Bell a few years ago, said nothing about it. Didn't apologize to him, still hasn't apologized because Drake just released a statement and spoke about it. Still has done nothing. And there's an even worse version of this, because another person who wrote a letter is Taran Killam. And Taran Killam appeared on many, many Nickelodeon shows. He worked on The Amanda Show with Drake Bell, and Drake Bell actually considered him a friend. He considered him such a friend that when Drake Bell ended up working with the legendary Carrie Fisher, he got a big life-size cutout and got Carrie Fisher to sign it for Taran. And he gave it to him, and Drake said there even was an interview where when Taran was cast on SNL, they did an interview that they asked, what was your favorite thing that you brought to New York? And Taran told the story about the Carrie Fisher cutout and said how Drake Bell gave it to him. So after Drake Bell has been attacked by Brian Peck, he has his friend who he had a friendship, a work relationship with. His friend ends up writing a letter siding with the person who attacked him and traumatized him. And then after all of this happened, Drake had to work with Taran again on Drake and Josh. And in case you don't know who Taran Killam is, like I said, he was on SNL. He's married to Kobe Smulders from How I Met Your Mother and Maria Hill in like every Marvel movie and show. And as I said, he was on a ton of Nickelodeon shows like The Amanda Show, all that, iCarly. And when Taran was on, especially All That and The Amanda Show, he was in his like later teens. And of course, Amanda Bynes, she was really young when she started on those shows. 10, 11, 12, 13, 14. And when Amanda was 15 and Taran was 19, they ended up dating. This was from March 2001 until May 2002.
Oh, God. Yeah, are we going to talk about the other guys?
As we just discussed, there were people like James Marsden, Will Friedle, Ryder Strong, Alan Thicke, and Taran Killam writing letters for a confessed child predator. All of these people were so close to Brian Peck that they spent a lot of time with him, time at his house, saw him being very close and inappropriate with children, which is what lots of other people were seeing. People who've been in Brian Peck's house have also spoken about the fact that he has on display many paintings from his friend John Wayne Gacy, who of course is a notorious serial killer. And Brian Peck proudly displays pictures that Gacy painted for him and keeps all of their letters in his nightstand. But Brian Peck is just the tip of a horrendous iceberg. There were two other predators working at Nickelodeon at the same time as Peck. They were also mentioned in Quiet on Set.
Van Nuys division officers have arrested a suspected child predator, 28-year-old Jason Michael Handy of Sherman Oaks. Handy has connections to the TV industry.
But there are other predators that worked at Nickelodeon at the same time that weren't mentioned. And there were also scores of other predators, all connected to Brian Peck, Dan Schneider, Nickelodeon, Disney, and an unbelievable amount of well-known faces in Hollywood. I know this looks unhinged, but there are so many other people that are connected to this Dan Schneider, Nickelodeon machine universe that have been...
Okay, I know I see Drake Bell. There's Dan Schneider right here. Amanda Bynes, Dan Snyder and all that. Okay, all his shows and everything. All that. The Amanda Show, Dragon Dolls, iCarly, Victorious, Sammy Cat. Zoe 101. I didn't know he was part of that Declassified. Because I remember on the podcast they were talking about that they were part of a different crew. It was not Dan Schneider's crew. That's Henry Danger. I don't know what this one is. Jeff Bazzer, James Franco. I don't know who are these other.
Similar crimes to Brian Peck, and I'm gonna go over some of them here.
Okay.
There were 2 other predators mentioned in the Quiet on Set documentary, and they are Jason Handy and Azil Channel. They were both working at Nickelodeon, both convicted of the same thing as Brian Peck, and Jason Handy actually was collecting like little trophies and tokens from each victim that he was trying to bring in. He was like writing all these very young girls.
So they're serial threats. That's what they are.
Letters, and then he would keep garments, even sometimes underwear of theirs, in these little Ziploc bags with their letters. And the police actually found all his journals where he admitted he was, quote, a full-blown pedophile. So Dan Schneider, obviously we've discussed. Brian Peck we've discussed, and Brian Peck is so connected to so many people throughout Hollywood through his work and also his friendships. And it's gotta make me wonder if these friends in the documentary that Drake Bell's dad talked about being around were any of these people that we're going to discuss. So Brian Peck, as I said, he worked on X-Men and was also friends with Bryan Singer, who has done, Superman Returns, Apt People, Bohemian Rhapsody, X-Men, X-Men 2, and he ended up being an investor in this company that's called DEN, Digital Entertainment Network. And if I'm trying to be as impartial as possible, this company was actually a really good idea. It came out in the early 2000s, and they kind of were thinking along the terms of YouTube and social media before those were things. And the internet didn't have the capacity to do those things, but they tried anyway. Digital Entertainment Network basically tried making their own shows to stream online. The first one they did was the show Chad's World, which there's a lot of people that were involved in their productions that are still very good friends with Bryan Singer today. Sean William Scott was in Chad's World, and also one of the movies that they tried to do was directed by Randall Kleiser, who was the director of Grease. The movie that Randall Kleiser directed for Den was called Royal Standard, and one of the boys who starred in Royal Standard was Nick S., and he has actually detailed in the documentary Open Secret all about the abuse that he endured from one of the head people at Den that we're going to discuss right now. Also, a lot of people have spoken out about the parties that happened that were basically expensed to this company. Den was started and ran by 3 people. Mark Collins Rector was one of the founders, and Chad Shackley was one of the founders also. They actually were both romantically involved with one another, and they began dating when Mark Collins Rector was 31 and Chad Shackley was 15. Brock Pierce also founded the company. He was a child star himself. He was in The Mighty Ducks. He played the young Gordon Bombay, and then he was also in that Sinbad movie First Kid. So they all had this company, and they're doing these shows, these movies. They have people investing. There's people like David Newman. Bryan Singer was an investor. He actually did a lot of promotion for it.
Hello, I'm Bryan Singer, and you're watching Rollywood at www.den.net. They wake up one day and they're different from most of the people around them, and and it's how they learn to embrace their extraordinary abilities and what's unique about them.
Gary Goddard, David Geffen, all investors, like I said, would throw these big parties that were basically expense to the company. They also were going to do an IPO, initial public offering, and they were looking to sell the company for $75 million. So they were looking at a potential very big payday for all of them.
I want to know how long. Okay, I need to beat this up. I wanted to know how long it took her to do this board. Now that's dedication, okay? They're not gonna catch me doing this.
So a lot of the story with Den is covered in the documentary An Open Secret. This was a documentary that was made going over basically all the predators in Hollywood. I'm going to discuss some of them here. And they ended up distributing this online for free because they couldn't get anybody to distribute it. So I've linked it down below with all my other sources. I really recommend you go and watch it because it's very good and it goes over a lot of the people that we're going to discuss here. So to cut a long story short, the Den founders ended up being tipped off that all of these parties that they were throwing with these very young boys was being investigated, and they basically picked up out of their mansion and left. You can see this mansion in the Chad's World show because they filmed there. Also, in the documentary that I just spoke about, An Open Secret, there is also a clip of Ben Savage from Boy Meets World arriving at the house, going up, hugging Mark Collins Rector. As the camera's turning away, it looks like Mark Collins Rector touches him in a weird way, and then they have this short discussion about how Ben Savage's favorite person is there, and it's just a really, really weird clip.
All right, shall we go in?
Your buddy's here.
Exactly. Very excited.
Just forgot to mention something here, so I'm just jumping in. Please excuse my voice. I've been doing 3-4 a.m. every day trying to get this video finished. But just to add on to the Ben Savage clip, there is an additional conversation after the bit I just mentioned.
So have you been to this house before?
Yeah.
Isn't this awesome?
Never been to a party here, though.
Never been to a party? Yes.
Some good ones?
Several.
Like, how crazy did it get?
And I just find it interesting how involved the Boy Meets World cast is, and in very different ways. Ben Savage obviously knew Mark Collins Rector. He's been at these parties. And then 25 years later, it's revealed that Mark Collins Rector's friend, Brian Peck, had letters of support written for him by Will Friedle and Ryder Strong, who co-starred on Boy Meets World with Ben Savage. Doing all this research for this video, I kept seeing all these articles talking about how Will, Ryder, and Danielle Fishel were ghosted by Ben Savage, and they were friends since Boy Meets World. They worked together since they were kids, but as adults, they were not only friends, they did conventions together, they did reunions together, and they also did an entire other show together, Girl Meets World. So I find it very interesting. They've been friends for 20-30 years, and then within a few months of each other, Ben Savage completely ghosts the Boy Meets World cast, all of them, and then a few months later it's revealed that Will Friedle and Ryder Strong wrote letters of support asking for leniency for Brian Peck. And obviously nobody really knew about these letters before. Ryder and Will thought they'd be sealed forever. And although the mainstream media is getting this story out now, obviously Quiet on Set took a very long time to put together all the research, legalities, fact-checking, sourcing, and these letters will have been unsealed quite a while ago, and they will have also reached out to Will and Ryder quite a while ago for comment as well. And obviously I'm not friends with these people, I don't know them, I've never even met them, and it could be a coincidence, but nonetheless, very interesting timing that this ghosting happens very close to the time that these letters were revealed. I am going to try and limit the amount of editing I do in this section because I don't want to risk anybody trying to get it taken down, putting in some false claim about something that I've used. So the clips in the documentary An Open Secret too. But when they were being investigated, they basically picked up everything out of this mansion and left. They went to Spain and somebody ended up tipping off the authorities. They were all arrested. Chad Shackley and Brock Pierce were released and they weren't accused of anything. But Mark Collins Rector was indicted and found guilty of transporting minors across state lines for similar things to what Brian Peck did. And after all this thing with Den happened, some of the investors that I mentioned, Gary Goddard, they ended up being accused of similar crimes to Brian Peck and Mark Collins Rector. Anthony Edwards, who he's in ER, he is in Top Gun, The Client, he's in loads of stuff. He ended up writing an essay and accusing Gary Goddard of the same types of crimes, and he also said that his friend was abused by him as well. And there's a man called Brian Claflin who was apparently another victim of Gary Goddard, according to Anthony Edwards. Anthony Edwards was also in The Client with Brad Renfro, who ended up dating Bryan Singer, and Brad Renfro, he was in The Client, he was an apt pupil that Bryan Singer directed. And Brad Renfro sadly died of an OD, as well as Brian Claflin, who was also accusing Gary Goddard. He also died by taking his own life. And to go back up a little bit, Bryan Singer also is the one who introduced Brock Pierce to Mark Collins Rector. Bryan Singer is friends with all of these Den people. That's why he was an investor. That's why he did publicity for them. And also you can see like old clips of him promoting and doing interviews on the Den channel. Also, there was a photographer who one of his favorite people to photograph and who was a manager for a short time of Brock Pierce was this very, very famous Hollywood photographer and manager, Bob Villard. His clients included Leonardo DiCaprio, Tobey Maguire, Brock Pierce, like I mentioned, and Tom Cruise.
I was sort of a class clown, and my publicist is looking at me.
And Bob Villard was convicted of crimes against children, and Bob Villard was in this trio of people that were getting kids cast on Nickelodeon, working with kids, and he also worked with Brian Peck on Growing Pains. Brian Peck also worked with another person in this trio of people I'm going to mention now, Marty Weiss. He worked on iCarly, The Sweet Life of Zack and Cody. He worked on Holes. He worked with a lot of Nickelodeon people. And he
didn't know so many people.
Being convicted of many, many, many crimes against children. Before we wrap up this chapter, I just want to basically summarize a lot of the things we've discussed here, but also provide a little bit more additional information on a lot of these people, because the vast majority of them are still working in the industry and not really suffering a lot of consequences. I do think there's much more to discuss here. All of these people I didn't mention, connections, projects, all those sorts of things. And I do plan on doing a video specifically on this chapter sometime after I launch my Patreon on May 1st. It's linked in the description box, so you can join for free right now if you want to. I don't do any sponsorship, so this is just a way that I can cover this. But before we end this chapter, let's go over the bullet points and key takeaways from what we discussed here. Dan Schneider, Brian Peck worked for him, with him. Marty Weiss, he was a manager. He worked on iCarly, other Nickelodeon shows, other Disney shows too. And the final one in our trio is Bob Villard, who, as I mentioned, he had many, many really famous clients. He was a manager, but also his photographs, he photographs a lot of young boys and it's always at this weird angle where the kids will have like no shirts on and they'll be like lower down, like the camera will be pointing down at them. I'll put some pictures up so you can see what I mean. But there's also some really, you will have seen Bob Villard's pictures. There's a really famous picture of Tobey Maguire and Leonardo DiCaprio where they're bowling when they're, like really young. Bob Villard took that picture. Additionally, Bob Villard worked on Growing Pains. They also worked with Brian Peck where there was, that weird clip where Brian Peck is being really creepy with a very young Leonardo DiCaprio.
I know we can show them our little drawings.
Show us a little drawings.
You see, we draw drawings of each other. Brian is the famous artist, and we always make fun of each other and portray each other in silly, satirical ways.
Leo, as you know, is the latest, hottest, hunkiest teen idol there is.
Yeah, muscles.
Look, speaking of hunky, huh?
Leo, what's it like to be a teen idol?
Ask her Cameron. I don't know.
Growing Pains had a lot of these people. It's like Nickelodeon and Growing Pains is where all these people came from and worked. And with the Den thing as well, they're just all connected in there. And obviously I don't want to start going into like conspiracy theories and speculations, but I have put a lot of articles in the sources where you can read a lot more about this. Again, I highly suggest watching An Open Secret to see more about especially Bob Villard and Marty Weiss. There's a lot about them in there. And they also do talk about Brian Peck too, because these people have all been working in Hollywood since the 80s, and they all help each other out with jobs and favors, because Brian Peck, even though he had been convicted, been to jail, he was hired by his friend Charlie Sheen on Anger Management.
Oh my God.
It's crazy how many connections all these people have. This is the stuff that we know. This is the stuff that we are aware of. So can you imagine the people that we don't know and we aren't aware of? And it's why I think it's so important to talk about these things, because if you look back at the whole Dan Schneider thing and Brian Peck, people have been talking about this on YouTube for years and years and years. And a lot of people would say, oh, that sounds like really conspiracy and stuff. And that's why it's such a big deal that Quiet on Set came out, because it's actually on TV in front of mainstream audiences. I mean, that's a huge deal. Obviously, you have to be careful, and there are some like really crazy conspiracy things, but when it's literally there in black and white that Marty Weiss and Bob Villard, Brian Peck are convicted of these things, you have to ask, like, what is going on? Because this should not be happening, and it's just worrying. If this is what we know, what don't we know?
There's more.
Believe it or not, there is still more to talk about, but it is April 2nd, Tuesday. I want to post this today because I have worked on this video for 2 weeks.
It's the day after tomorrow today.
I haven't left my house in 4 days, and I've slept about 10 hours over those 4 days. So I'm going to call it here. I am looking at doing a potential part 2. It just depends how this video does, because I don't think it's going to do very well because so many other people are talking about it. But justifiably so. It's an important topic, and obviously so many people grew up watching Nickelodeon. I could also do like a Disney Channel version of this, because there's a lot of stuff that
I want to see the
over there
Disney
too,
one,
and some of these people are connected. So let me know down in the comments if that's something you'd enjoy. I am going to cover topics like this and other things over on my Patreon when I start it on May 1st. It's linked down below if you want to join for free right now, or just even keep an eye on.